Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Town of Vesuvius Special Open Meeting, August the 8th, 2024 in Council Chambers, and it's at 10 o'clock a.m. So could we have the approval of the agenda, please? Councillor King, Councillor Poderico, all in favor? Thank you. And before we start the meeting, Councillor Chong is on a plane somewhere, I think, trying to get back, but he's not here today. And we'd like to welcome our new corporate officer, Marg Coulson. So welcome, Marg. We will enjoy having you help us with all of these questions that we have. Thank you. Okay, so we need to approve no, we've already done that. Let's go down to bylaws, and we have the official community plan amendment bylaw, and it would be the consideration of first and second reading today. And we will ask our planner, Chris and Shannon, Chris Garris, Shannon Duong, to please explain the 162 pages. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So I'll just wait for the PowerPoint to come up here. And so while it's being loaded, I'll just mention for council's benefit. So I apologize, there's a lot of information I'm gonna go through. And just in preparing the PowerPoint, I figured usually I'd prefer to wait to the end to answer questions because I find sometimes subsequent slides will deal with the issue. But in this particular case, there's a lot of specific issues that probably require council's attention. So rather than wait to the end, probably in between each section or each issue as we go, we can stop and see if there's any discussion or questions, or I might even need some direction on some of the items in the slides as is in the report. So with that, I'll just start off, and I always like to start with some background. So again, and I know council is probably very aware of this, but the genesis for the zoning bylaw review is twofold, I would argue. Obviously, the first important consideration was that the town did adopt a new OCP in 2022, and that OCP contains some direction in relation to the zoning bylaw, specifically that it should be updated to ensure that it's furthering the goals and objectives contained within the OCP, and also to address specific items that were identified in the OCP. An example I've given here is allowing accessory dwellings in a greater number of residential zones. Of course, the other consideration too is that the current zoning bylaw is very old as far as zoning bylaws go. This one is 26 years. It's been amended 150 times. And, when you've had a bylaw that old and amended that many times, and all of this is inadvertent, it's not intentional, but just with those number of amendments, different elements get introduced, different regulations. Sometimes those don't speak to existing regulations within the bylaw that causes inconsistencies and conflicts. And so it is good to review your bylaw on a fairly regular basis. I think 10 years is a rule of thumb, just to make sure that it's up to date and current and that there's no incoherence within the bylaw itself. So again, as council is aware, when the zoning bylaw review kicked off, there was 3 components to it. Obviously, reviewing the main zoning bylaw itself. The town has the second zoning bylaw that it applies to its foreshore and lake areas. And then also coming up with a short-term rental program was to be part of the review. However, this was all determined prior to the provincial changes that came down with Bill 44 last year. And that really did change the legislative landscape and the requirements on local governments in terms of residential development and permitted densities and dwelling types and building envelopes and all that kind of stuff. So a decision was made earlier this year to hive off the short-term rental component. So for anybody who's watching and may have concerns about short-term rental, it hasn't been forgotten. It's just not part of the current project, and it will be dealt with separately later this year. So again, just before I get into some of the proposed changes to the draft, a reminder for council. So we did present to council multiple times at committee between February and May on a whole range of different issues that we sought direction on. And that direction from council is what informed the preparation of the draft zoning bylaw that was presented at committee on June 11th. And when we presented that draft, we also put forward a rough public engagement process. I say rough because it didn't have all the specific details, but it touched on the main elements of what we were proposed to do in terms of engagement, which was obviously posting as much information as we could on the town's website. And I would argue that there is a fair amount there in terms of staff reports, presentations, comparison tables, transitions, draft bylaws, et cetera. Agency referrals. So agency referrals, for those who might not be familiar, that would be to organizations like Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, Agricultural Land Commission, Osoyoos Indian Band, Interior Health, et cetera, just to give them an opportunity to review the bylaw and potentially flag for council any comments or concerns or preferred changes that they might need to see. And then obviously the last component of that was the public engagement part. So there was notification in the newspapers, I believe on radio as well. We did have that first attempt at a public information meeting, which unfortunately due to technical difficulties had to be rescheduled for the following week. But I think that worked out quite well in terms of us being able to maintain the online component, but also to provide the in-person component. And then recognizing that maybe not all issues are suitable for discussion in a public venue, we did offer property owners who had specific concerns the opportunity to come and talk to staff one-on-one about their issues, and some of those are going to be reflected in some of the subsequent slides here. So with that, I'm going to jump into the issues and just highlight for them some of the changes that have happened to the draft since council last saw it in June. And so the first one is in relation to the small-scale multi-unit housing implementation extension request, which the province offered to all local governments in the province. The request had to be submitted by the June 1st deadline, I believe, and then the province was supposed to get back with a decision by June 30th. The town did put in a request because of concerns around water and infrastructure and the ability of the existing infrastructure to accommodate the required density changes mandated by the province. As of today, we still haven't heard from the province on the extension request. So the original version of the draft zoning bylaw that council saw put forward the 3 to 4 units per parcel because that's what's required by the legislation. But because we have the extension request in and because the province may grant that to the town, the density in the current version of the bylaw before you is now set at 2. And so the thinking is that if the province extends the implementation period by 5 years, which I think is what the request was, this version of the bylaw meets that requirement. So we wouldn't have to make any changes. But if the extension request is denied, we would have to bring forward an amendment to reintroduce that 3 to 4 units per parcel.
Can I stop you right there and just ask? I thought at one point, I think it was when we were in Penticton, that you said that one of the requests had been allowed, and I wasn't sure which one it was, and I was assuming it was way back at the beginning of July. Was it somebody else's?
So I think what you might have been referring to is one of the exemption criteria that was met. So for the West Bench within electoral area F of the RDOS, that one would have met an exemption criteria for hazardous lands.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can I ask, do we know whether anybody who's applied? Because I would imagine there are quite a few people that have applied. I mean, we're all kind of in the same boat with the same issues. Have we heard anything from the province? I mean, they're busy with floods and wildfires and everything else right now. I get it, but
no.
No?
My understanding, I think the province published a list a few weeks back. You might have seen it, which is that was a list where West Vancouver was particularly singled out for having purposely not implemented small-scale multi-unit housing. But the list also included every local government that had implemented it, and then those that had made an extension request, one of which obviously was Osoyoos. But as I recall from that list, there's only about 10 to 15 local governments in the province had made an extension request. But we haven't, and it's on my to-do list, but we haven't heard anything from the province. The regional district has made a similar request in relation to Oak Falls and Heritage Hills, and we haven't heard anything either. So,
well, let's hope that that happens. Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, so at this point, I don't think I need specific direction from council on this one because, of course, there are infrastructure concerns. At a minimum, the 2 dwelling units per parcel, what I understand from operations, that can be accommodated. So that's the version of the bylaw that's before you, but we fully recognize that there might be an imminent need to amend it if the province denies the extension request. So, oh, and so I've already covered it, but so the purpose of this slide was just to emphasize that, the original version under permitted uses included apartments and townhouses as permitted dwelling types. So that's been removed from the current version. And then under 11.1.4, the original version had a density of 3 to 4 based on parcel size, which was 280 square meters. That's been removed pending the decision on the extension request. So this is what the bylaw looks like currently. Okay, so another one, and I flagged this for council when we came forward in committee back in February as potentially one of the more significant changes in relation to the provincial policy manual. So there was two aspects to Bill 44. There was the mandatory density requirements, which I just touched on in the previous slides. But the other one was that the legislation was changed to make reference to a local government having to consider any applicable guidelines that may be published by the minister. So the minister did publish the policy manual back in December. And when we came to you at committee in February, we took a lot of the guidance in the manual for an urban area the size of Soyuz and put that into the proposed RS1 zone. There weren't major changes, like council will recall, like the recommendation was to go to 11-meter height allowance. And I think your current bylaw varies from 9 to 10 meters. Make an exception for accessory dwellings, let them have 8 meters. Look at your setbacks, which we're touching on here, parcel coverage, the parking requirements, 1 per dwelling unit. And again, you may recall, and I've used this a number of times in different slides, what the province is trying to get to is a bigger envelope, closer to the street, less landscaping. And that, yes, that is going to look very different than your established residential neighborhoods, but this is the future. And you should have a zoning that allows for a building envelope that enables these types of dwelling units to be constructed. So again, you know, you can see here, you've got a range of setbacks in your current residential zones that range from 3.5 to 6. And the reason for that range is, of course, we're dealing with 7, I think, different residential zones at the moment. The recommendation was 2 meters. Now, I think one of the unanticipated benefits of the extension request to the provinces is that we now get the benefit of looking at what other local governments in the region have done in terms of their approach to implementation. And even though we recommended at committee a 2-meter front setback, you can see here, and there's a clearer version in your staff report. We looked at all the local governments in the Southern Interior Local Government Association and how they addressed small-scale multi-unit housing implementation in their bylaws. None of them went to a 2-meter front setback. So that caused us some concern at the staff level. We did look at what the average was. There isn't really one. It varies from 3 meters up to 6 meters for those local governments who have to accommodate the 3 to 4 units, which is what Osoyoos will have to accommodate once the extension request is decided. But in terms of modifying our recommendation to you on this, we did look specifically at South Okanagan local governments. Oliver and Summerland have both implemented a 3-meter front setback. So a little discomfort with the 2 meters, given what other local governments have done. You know, recognizing that 2 meters maybe it was probably more appropriate for the Vancouvers and Surreys, but certainly hasn't been implemented in the Southern Interior. So what we're putting before council today is that a change occur to that. And that instead of the 2 meters that we recommended previously, that we follow Summerland and Oliver and apply a 3-meter front setback. So I think, yeah, so before I go on to the next one, I'll stop there in case there's questions or if you want to take a different direction or.
I certainly agree with that after reading it, but see if anybody else has any. Councillor King?
Thank you. Thank you. I guess about the rear though, you're making that smaller also.
Mm-hmm.
So is that kind of realistic with the other 2 towns you just mentioned are like a 2 and 3 at the rear?
Well, just looking at the chart here, I can see Oliver has got 3 meters front and rear, and Summerland has 3 meters as well. So it looks like those 2 local governments are taking the same approach to the minister's guidelines, with the exception of the 2-meter recommendation for the front.
So again, wouldn't that kind of put houses really close together if this got passed, making that such small, like half the distance is what they're recommending? You're reckon 3 meters, you're reckon 1.5. So wouldn't that kind of put properties
Oh, I
really
see.
close
Sorry.
together?
1.5 for the side and for
No,
the rear?
Yeah, sorry, I was.
Yeah.
I was quickly looking at the slide and I saw the 3 meters at the bottom and just assumed without reading the brackets that was rear. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
What does
I mean-
what does Oliver have there? Do they have a?
They've,
They have
well,
3.
yeah, Oliver and Summerland have 3. And again, just quickly looking at it, it looks like only Vernon and West Kelowna have gone to the 1.5 meters on the rear. So if council's preference is 3 meters on the rear as well, I mean, we can certainly make that change as well.
Well, I'd be happy to at least split the difference, make it 2.5. And
What do you think, Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just wondering if that's because when you look at that picture, they have another building in the backyard. Is that to make more room, leave more room for a carriage house?
I don't have, sorry, I don't have it on this presentation, but I'm fairly certain that the proposed, and maybe you can double check this for me, but I'm fairly certain, because we established 2 setbacks in each zone, one for principal structures and one for accessory structures.
Mhm.
And I'm fairly positive that the setbacks for both in the proposed RS1 zone are the same. So what we were showing here previously, the 2, 1.5, 1.2, and 3 would be the same setbacks applied to an accessory dwelling.
Okay,
And I mean, we can certainly change it for both if that's your preference. But yeah, I mean, it is, again, the whole idea with the minister's manual is to provide flexibility, right? And
Yeah.
try to reduce the regulatory burden and the need for variance permits if possible. So theoretically, reduced setbacks would allow for that, but recognizing that, yeah, not many people, at least on the front, have gone to 2 meters. We think that should be reconsidered. Rear, again, yeah, I take the point. Looking at the chart, not many have gone to 1.5 meters other than the 2 at the bottom there. So.
well,
Six of
Mhm.
or 4.5 of them, and thickness is 6.
I think a little bit more, rather than a smaller amount is better
Yeah,
from my point of view.
Sure.
I'm wondering if we had quite a lot of information in here after from our surveyor, land
Oh, yes,
surveyor, and
yeah.
he's made quite a few comments, which I assume would, kind of made sense, but I didn't catch them all, but I just wondered if that's what he would recommend too.
Well, I know we were very curious to see what kind of response we would get on the 2-meter setback. And
Yes.
so we had talked as the representations came in, has anybody commented on the proposed setbacks? And as I recall, most of the comments were on the density.
Mm. Okay,
So,
so they're not as concerned, but that would just be the people who commented, maybe not.
mhm.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Councillor.
I got no problem with the 3 meter at the front. That's giving them more room, but I'd like to change the rear to 2 from 1.5.
Okay.
I don't know if I get support for that or not, but that would be my
What do the rest of you think? I'm okay with moving it to 3, but I would, I would move it to 2 if that was the wish of council.
Yeah, I mean, for your benefit, and just as a reminder, our recommendation on the 1.5 meters is straight out of the policy manual,
Mm.
right? So,
Yeah. But there's only 2 places that have done it yeah, so my thinking is that, that those aren't good comparisons, yeah.
mhm. Yeah,
So what do you think, guys? 2 or 3? 2? Somebody else want it? You agree with that?
I'm fine the way it is up here.
With 1.5?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well. Yeah, Zach? Yeah, I could do 2 or 3. I think maybe we better make it at least 2. Or yeah. I'm okay with 2. Is everybody, and I know that Mars would like to leave it like this, but are you okay with leaving it, moving it to 2? It's not a huge difference. I know you are, but you have a say. Okay, let's put it to 2 then. Is that all right? Okay,
So just for our benefit, so council's okay with the 3 meters on the front and for the rear for
Yeah.
both principal and accessory to go to 2 meters, just
Yes.
because they are consistent otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
yeah, I think so.
okay. Great. Okay, so cooking facilities. So I'll preface this one by saying, we initially thought that cooking facilities and motel units might be something better addressed through the vacation rental review. Because theoretically that process is looking at short-term tourist accommodation generally, although with a specific focus on residential zones. But in terms of, I don't want to say consistency, but maybe creating a level playing field so that motels can compete with the residential use of dwelling units for short-term accommodation. Should the vacation rental review be looking at allowing cooking facilities in a motel? And so to start with, what I've put up here is the existing definition from the current zoning bylaw, so your 1998 bylaw. and it's silent. Although it does say complete with sanitary facilities, possibly, you know, if there was, and again, I don't know what the past interpretation has been, but if motels have been seen to be allowed to have cooking facilities, ideally it would have made reference to, you know, with their own complete sanitary and cooking facilities, but that's not there. So because it's silent on it, our understanding or interpretation of it is that the current definition does not allow for cooking facilities in a motel unit. But, and again, doesn't matter where this is, but it's not hard to find examples because of course, tourist accommodation is posted online. All you need to do is look at a motel in town, and I think it's not uncommon. I don't know how common, but it's not uncommon to find units that already have cooking facilities in them. And so we recognize that they're out there. And then while we were looking at the various SILGA member zoning bylaws for the setback issue, we thought, okay, well, we're going to be looking at the bylaws anyway. Let's take a look to see how they deal with cooking facilities in their hotels and motels. And so you can see here, and again, this is not meant to be precise. It's just a summary observation of what we saw in other local government zoning bylaws, and then taking some quick notes on what we saw and trying to do some interpretations as required. But it's not uncommon to see other local government zoning bylaws allow, in a majority of instances, cooking facilities in a motel. Significantly less common to see it allowed in a hotel unit. You can see here 52% do allow it in a motel, but 62% do not allow it in a hotel. So recognizing that, clicker is gone quiet. Yeah, I hope I didn't hit the power button, but so what we're proposing, and certainly open to direction from council on this, is you know, recognizing that, you know, it appears to be common in motel units in town. It appears to be a common allowance in other local government zoning bylaws. Ideally, we would have preferred to have it dealt with through the vacation rental review, but maybe now is the time to deal with this particular component, to amend the definition of motel to specifically include a reference to cooking facilities so that it's not ambiguous going forward. Now, if that's not council's preference, we can certainly amend the definition back to what you saw in June, where it didn't include a cooking.
Well,
facility.
quite frankly, I have lived in motel units in this town before I bought a house. And they had, and that was back in the dark ages, and they all had cooking facilities in them, which is why people want to stay there and for a month at a time or something. So any motel that I've been in, not the hotels so much, and I know that some of the units have cooking facilities and some don't, but oftentimes the hotels that don't have cooking facilities offer breakfast, which is even better. You don't have to cook it yourself. So I think that you would find in Osoyoos that many, many, many of the motels have cooking facilities, which is, I think, a bonus. Are you okay? Go ahead, Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. I got a question around include bathrooms. Isn't mandatory that they all have bathrooms? Why would that be on there?
I think it's just for clarity, right?
May include bathrooms? I mean, isn't it given? You couldn't build one without.
Well, but people will, and then they will say it's a motel. And it's like, well, is it really? And does your zoning allow for it? And do you meet these requirements as specified here? Because if you don't have a bathroom in there, then maybe it's not really a motel and you're doing a boarding house or something else in a zone that may not allow for it.
Yeah,
So,
but you're saying it may include a bathroom, meaning it might not have a
yeah,
bathroom.
that's right. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I can't speak to the building code requirements for a bathroom in a motel, but I mean, there may be tourist accommodation buildings created that, yeah. But I get your point that this is a may, so. Yeah. Well, but it's not I guess for me, it was when we were drafting this up, it's not mandating that they have cooking facilities, that it's an optional thing that you can provide, but really, I take your point. How optional is it that they're not going to give you a
Yeah.
bathroom facility, right?
That part doesn't make sense to me either. Go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that basically when you look at the cooking facilities, I think it's probably a safety issue. And I know that a couple motels, because when I was doing insurance that I insured, had quite a lot of inspections by the fire department also. They
Mhm.
can change all their plugs to 3-prong plugs, made sure they're cooking facilities. So I think it's, if this was there to, because of cooking facilities is a problem, that's kind of a safety thing that we have other people that look after that to make sure that they stay safe.
So do we need to add that in there that, they need to be inspected or no? We don't. We just say that they may have a bathroom and cooking facilities, boy.
Yeah.
That's a funny way of saying it. However, I agree. I mean, I think so many of them have it already that, to say no to it would be
Mhm.
ridiculous,
Yeah.
quite frankly.
Yeah.
I know, yeah. It might be.
But I think you gotta think ahead for new development. Yeah, that's fine. We're talking about what's here in town already. But new development, I'm gonna build a motel and I don't necessarily have to put bathrooms in. I still don't see that necessarily being there.
Well, I mean, we can certainly change that. So the may is only applied to the cooking facilities, but if you can mandate that they have, like, and again, I'm speaking without knowledge of what the building code would require, but
Yeah.
from a zoning perspective, if you want to mandate that a motel unit had to have a bathroom in each unit, I mean, we can certainly structure the definition to reflect that.
I think we should.
I agree with that comment.
Okay.
Can we say they must have a bathroom and may have cooking facilities? Could
Mhm.
we change it?
Yep, we can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've got a note.
Okay.
We've got it noted. Yeah,
okay. Thank you.
yeah. The resolution, when you get to it, could be a mouthful. Okay, so that takes care of camping, cooking in motel units. So campground zone, so, again, and I've only put this in here because I know there was a lot of questions about this, both at the public information meeting and also in some emails that were received that may not have been included in your package because it wasn't really stating a preference. It was more asking questions, which we attempted to clarify for people. But just questions around the campground, park models, can they be put on? How can they be used? Et cetera. And this is just a reminder for, again, anybody who's listening, and also for council's benefit, that we did ask or seek direction on this, again, because of the statutory deadlines around small scale multi-unit housing. And even though I know council had made a request in 2021 that the campground zone be done as part of the zoning bylaw review, we were just concerned, the time available to us and the issues before us. Could we deal with campgrounds as a separate review once the zoning bylaw was done? And that was the direction that council provided us. So we haven't forgot about that. It's on staff's radar for sure. I suspect it would be later this year, or early into next year, but we would be looking at the campground review, subject to council still wanting us to do that. And, hopefully at that point we can get some clarity around, are these campgrounds or are they manufactured home parks? How are they being used? And what are we going to do with them going forward? So no direction, no new direction in the draft zoning bylaw, but certainly something we'll be looking at later. So.
Can I ask a question right now then?
Sure.
It ties into the next slide also. We go through this, we might make some minor changes. And if we pass first and second reading, then do we have to come back when we look at these RV lots and lake shore, make amendments to it?
Mhm.
Okay, that's
Yep.
how it works. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, well, certainly that's how your current bylaw has been amended 150 times. Like, just stuff comes up that requires council to maybe set a new direction, right? So. Okay, so the foreshore and lake zoning bylaw. So certainly there was some interest in this. And again, just some background. So I think the original concept for the review had been to review the land, well, for lack of a better word, the land zoning bylaw, and to have a new bylaw in place for municipal lands, and then also to review the foreshore bylaw, but potentially to have a separate foreshore bylaw maintained going forward. From staff's perspective, we feel there's certainly a strong benefit to reducing the number of zoning bylaws that the town needs. There's no requirement compelling you to maintain different zoning bylaws for land versus water. And also there's a lot of duplication and overlap between the various sections within the bylaws. And again, it doesn't make sense to maintain two of them. For consistency, interpretation, and upkeep, we feel there's a strong rationale for having one consolidated zoning bylaw dealing with both land and water. And so that was the direction we saw from council earlier this year. And that's how the bylaw has been structured. Sorry, it does propose draft zoning bylaw 1395 to repeal the foreshore and lake bylaw and to bring its provisions into the main zoning bylaw. And so as part of the public engagement, one of the issues that was brought to our attention is the foreshore and lake zoning bylaw currently contains a reference to a semi-waterfront parcel, which is one that it defines as being separated by the lake, from the lake by a town-owned right-of-way, which the example I'll show in a minute is, I think, a dedicated but unmade road between some properties and the lake. And the bylaw says that this particular waterfront or semi-waterfront parcel zone shall be basically a perpendicular line from the municipal boundary back to that particular property, which crosses the town-owned land. So there's an example here, and this is from the zoning map that's part of bylaw 1294. You can see here it doesn't actually technically apply to the upland parcels. It's been drawn to the foreshore, but I think the intent of the zone regulation was to draw those lines and to cover the parcels here that front Jasmine. And this is just an attempt to try to visually show what that could look like in terms of a zone. So it crosses over the town road dedication and out into the lake, and would potentially grant those parcels the ability to apply for docks, buoys, swim platforms, which is actually what the bylaw says. There's a provision in there under the, I think, W1 zone that says, subject to provincial approval, upland parcel owners could apply for these particular items, the dock, the boat lift, or the buoy. From staff's perspective, it's an interesting provision in that it doesn't actually appear to be a zoning regulation per se. We would argue that it's almost covering off what's otherwise specified in section 460 of the act, that once a local government adopts a zoning bylaw, it must then define procedures on how a property owner may apply for an amendment or a permit to that bylaw. And that's exactly what let's see where I have it here. Yeah, section 5.21 is setting out the procedures for how to apply for an amendment or a permit. It's not actually a zoning reg, it's more of an application procedure. And yes, we recognize that 1294 is a zoning bylaw, but from our perspective, it appears that the owner in this case of the land affected by the bylaw is the province as the owner of Crown land, and that the semi-waterfront parcel owners don't actually appear to be impacted by 1294 because it's not their land that's been affected by that particular bylaw, even though the bylaw sets out application processes by which they could apply for council for approval for certain items. So again, yeah, just reiterating here that we don't think that section 5.2.1 in bylaw 1294 is actually a zoning reg. We think it's actually more of an application requirement that could be accommodated within the town's land use procedures bylaw. And we have less confidence in this interpretation because it is really just an application requirement, but maybe it could be construed as a policy statement that council has an openness to considering applications from upland owners to use Crown land through the issuance of a permit or a bylaw amendment. But usually if it was really a policy statement, you would expect there to be criteria there indicating how council would consider such applications against X, Y, or Z criteria, but that's not currently comprised within 5.2.1, which is why we don't really think it's a policy, it's more of an application requirement. But anyway, long story short, because of the way it's structured, we're not proposing that be carried forward into bylaw 1395, and that's the semi-waterfront parcel reference. And one of the reasons for that, apart from the, I guess, administrative considerations, is that also we don't feel that a zoning regulation, even though I just articulated why we feel it's not a zoning regulation, should be setting future policy direction for council. That policy direction should be in the OCP, indicating council's openness or willingness to consider upland property owners' applications to use Crown land, which it has that ability through the foreshore lease to do. But that really the lake health assessment or other possible reviews related to the lake should inform that direction. That direction shouldn't be informed by a zoning reg. Once you establish the policy, certainly we can go back and change the zoning regs to reflect whatever direction it is that you want to take, but it shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be the zoning informing the OCP. It should be OCP informing zoning. So that's our particular take. I know it's potentially very much of interest to property owners on Jasmine, but we don't feel this change takes anything away from them at this particular point in time.
Okay, I know, I'll just speak first, and then I'm sure everybody has it. We kind of feel that, this could have used probably a whole day discussion, this issue, because it's very complicated. And we have had some letters and we understand that. I know, excuse me, before I was ever on council, I was on a member of the Lake Recreational and Commercial Use Task Force that was a committee of the town. And there were members of town council that were on this. And there were a lot of people in the town who were members of this. And we looked at a whole ton of issues around the lake, just of course, just in the town part, not the other 3 jurisdictions that have interest in this lake. But I do know that at the end of it, there were 35 recommendations. One that I remember, because we were asked at the time, was not to allow houseboats on the lake to do short-term rentals. And we said, absolutely not. That was certainly something that we would not allow. But there were several other, and I cannot find my copy of this. And I even asked, our planning director out there to have a look, and we can't seem to find everything, but we're looking at it. However, I do know that at the time, there was a great deal of discussion about Jasmine and Acacia Drive in there. And I don't quite remember how we ever resolved it. I just know that there was one person who lived along there that happened to be a member of the committee. So that was, where we got the information from. I just think it's been sort of confusing since then. And some of the things that, I know that some of the people that have upland property, they actually don't pay the same taxes as if you had it on, if you had lakeshore property. They also do not pay the foreshore tax, which is improvements on whatever they've put out there. My concern is that they've been doing this and using the docks and the beach and so on down there for many, many, many years, and it's considered something that they sort of have a right to. And I know that it's been confusing, and they probably have been told over the years maybe slightly different information depending on who read it or how they interpreted it, because it is open to interpretation. I'm just, I think this one is going to require some more discussion on it. And certainly in here, when we look at the W1 zone, that includes all these things, but is there any other property in the town that has the same concerns as the one on Jasmine does? Do you know of any other, or not exactly the same concerns? I wasn't sure. No.
No, and I mean, I mean, of course, from our perspective, we're looking at an existing bylaw and how can we best incorporate that bylaw into this draft? And the only provisions in that bylaw that speak to a scenario like this is the one that references the properties on Jasmine. And I think I'm just trying to see if I have it here
Okay.
again. Yeah, so sorry, I cut out the legal description here between Acacia Court and may apply to the town, but that was the only description in the bylaw referencing a situation like this. So we just assumed that this was the only one in town. Otherwise, the bylaw would have made similar references to other locations, but
Yes, it doesn't.
right?
Okay, so I live on the lake, but I don't live in the town. If I wanted to put a dock or something out front of my house, would I not have to get permission to do that? And I'm not sure who from. So would it be from the province? Would it be from Department of Fisheries and Oceans? Do you know that information? I don't have one. That's why I haven't got the answer to it.
So my understanding, because of course, I mean, we're familiar with the issue in the context of electoral area A primarily, is that there's different categories, well, 2 different categories for the lakes. Okanagan is treated different than the other lakes. And my understanding in relation to Soyuz, and again, I'm saying this from our experience in Area A, is that the province has set out basic parameters, which a dock, if it complies with those parameters, it doesn't require provincial approval. And so in Area A, we tried to draft our zoning regulations to reflect that provincial allowance so that we're both looking at the same thing, But if there's ever a situation, and you know, I think I've used the example of the float plane dock
Yes.
that went up at the winery, which is what caused us to review our
Right.
rules. It met provincial requirements, but it caused a lot of concern amongst the neighbors. And we didn't have really robust dock regulations in place at the time. And so the board asked us to look at that. So what I would say to, again, and I mean, I'm hesitant to comment on a different agency's approval process, but my understanding is if you comply with the provincial footprint for your dock, you don't need their approval.
Okay.
If you extend beyond what they allow, then yes, you have to get their approval, just like you would with local government. If you extend beyond the building envelope for a house, you have to get approval from council
Sure.
for a variance, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but I think the wrinkle here is that applies to waterfront property owners.
Mhm.
In this particular case, it's the town that's the waterfront property owner because it's the
Mhm.
town's road dedication that adjoins the lake, not the Jasmine Drive properties.
Okay, Counselor King, did you have a question on this one? Because I still find it, you know, pretty confusing, and I'm sure the property owners do as well. Go ahead.
Can I just see what you're proposing? I see I see what the issue was, and you're making what the proposal is, or we're gonna come back and talk about this more?
Well, it's up to you if you want to talk about it more with us. We're happy to do so, but what we're flagging is that the current foreshore and lake zoning bylaw includes a reference to what it refers to as semi-waterfront parcels, right? And that applies to the Jasmine. We're suggesting that our reading of that provision within the bylaw, well, the allowance that's there to us it doesn't strike us as a zoning regulation per se. All it's setting out is how they may make application to the town to get approval for something else. And to us, that's a land use procedures bylaw application requirement. It's not a zoning regulation. The zoning regulations are already set out by the W1 zone, and it says what you can and can't have. And again, my understanding too is that in the 12 years that your foreshore and lake zoning bylaw has been in place, there has been no application from those property owners to seek approval. And I get that there might have been issues around that or confusion as to how they could do that, and how the requirement for provincial approval is applied when I believe the town has a foreshore lease agreement with the province, which basically puts the town into that position now, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still Crown land. So it is a confusing issue, but sorry, so the proposal is not to carry forward the semi-waterfront parcel reference into the new zoning bylaw.
Okay, just say hypothetically, it moved forward and they applied to us for an application, then do we have to present it to the province to get it passed, or we can pass it?
We'd have to confirm that, but my basic understanding of your foreshore lease agreement with the province is that you have stepped into the shoes of province to make determinations on these types of situations. But well, you took the buck from the province and said, we'll start making those decisions for you. But there is a wrinkle there for us in that at the end of the day, it's Crown land and it's not their land and they're not foreshore owners. So how do they make that application to the town? Because they would generally have to have the consent of the property owner, which is the province, but you have a foreshore lease agreement. So how does all that work, right? So.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
We have a lot on Lakeshore Drive and the road bypasses and we have Lakeshore property, but part of right beside it is a part of that front beach, which is leased land. So that leased land, basically, I think it's every 3 or 5 years, we have to apply back to the province for another permit to be able to use that part of the beach.
Okay.
And I think we do that. I'm not sure if we go to the town first and then the province, but the province ends up giving us a permit to use that for extended, I can't remember, it's 3 years or 5 years because I'm not on that committee. And then basically our beach is this big and then we get to use this part as part of our development on this side of the road. So I think there's a process to be able to do, but I don't know. That's a lot more properties and it is a big pain every 3 years or 5 years to go through to get that renewed.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming that's a waterfront property.
Yeah.
As well. Like you actually have like the property line directly adjoins the lake. It's not separated by any other.
That's separated by the road, Lakeshore Drive.
So it's over on
separates
Lakeshore Drive.
We're
Well,
on
if
this,
it's-
we're on this
if it's-
side and the water's over here.
Yeah,
The
but
road goes through here.
if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's a hooked parcel. So legally, even though the road bisects your parcel, you do have a part of it that directly fronts the lake, which is not the same situation as here.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
because that part is leased, I know. We have to
Oh.
get a permit.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I'm sorry that we can't, have anybody talk right now. Are you okay, everybody okay with what Chris is sort of suggesting on this? And
I mean, really, I mean, for us, if they can get the approval of the property owner to make an application to you, then we would have, like, in accordance with the act, we have to process it. You have to consider it. You don't have to approve it. You don't have to, I mean, it's up to you to judge it on its merits and decide what you want to do with it. But to us, that section of the current bylaw, it's not establishing anything that we don't have to do already under the legislation, right?
Mm.
So.
Just sort of clarity, then we'd have to make up some type of application if we proceeded that direction? I mean, how, send us a letter, we want to do it?
So this is a more complicated question for us at a staff level, because we'd have to get into the terms of that lease agreement that the town has with the province and what it sets out in terms of expectations for how the town will deal with those kind of requests on behalf of the province when they come in, right?
so could we put that on a future meeting and have a look at that?
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is this not our renewal year or next year with that foreshore lease? I think that was what sparked part of this conversation originally, was the
Yeah,
renewal date for that, obviously, and then with our other, our boy issues and everything else.
it is. And I think it was actually April was the renewal point, but we reached out to provincial staff and told them our situation, and that, you know, and again, very similar to the whole issue with the vacation rental, is that, like, you know, we're 100% focused on the small scale multi-unit housing. We don't have time or resources to look at the foreshore lease renewal at this point. Is that going to be a problem? And they said, no, they've got so much work that it's going to take them a while to get to it too. And I think there was also reference made to a clause within the existing lease that's not an automatic renewal, but it will just continue on until the renewal is formally dealt with. So we do have some breathing room there, but yeah, it's certainly something that needs to be looked at. It's just, with everything else on the go at the moment, it's been pushed kind of like vacation rentals and campground till after this process is done.
Okay. Go ahead. Thank you.
So just to clarify then, just as we're making notes here, so staff are proposing that the concept of semi-waterfront parcel not be carried into bylaw 1395. And yeah, future direction can certainly be taken from other projects or initiatives that I think council's already indicated it wants to undertake anyway. But certainly, I mean, if there's a desire by council to preserve some aspect of that semi-waterfront parcel, we would argue it would be in the form of an amendment to the land use procedures bylaw. And that ideally there's some kind of criteria established as to how council would review those types of applications as they come in, but we're happy to come back to council at a future point and discuss that further.
One of the things that we had on our budget meetings was to pave that trail in there, which would cause a fair amount of digging and moving things around. That hadn't been done because we postponed it. Would that make any difference to it or not? No? No,
No.
okay, fine, good. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to move now, I think, from general topics into more specific ones that either came up through the public engagement process or that staff became aware of just in reviewing and making further amendments to the bylaws we went along. And so in relation to 8,000 Cottonwood, when we were doing the transition, because of course, as council will recall, we feel that CD zones really should only be contemplated when there is no other zone available to accommodate the proposed use. But yet, having said that, a lot of CD zones existing in the current zoning bylaw seem to reflect, to a large extent, other existing zones, whether it was the downtown commercial zone or the medium density residential zone. And so rather than carry these CD zones into the new bylaw, can we look at transitioning them to more established traditional type zones? And so in looking at 8,000 Cottonwood, as you can see here on right, what we saw was a vacant parcel that, you know, in looking at the records available to us, you know, nothing had happened. And so we weren't sure that the project was still going forward. I think there were some DPs that had previously been considered by council that it expired earlier this year and there had been no renewal. So to us, we assumed that that particular project that had informed the CD11 zone was no longer being pursued. And so the zone that we put forward to you in June was just a standard RM1 zone. It came to light subsequently, though, that the applicant, that the property owner has been actively working on it. and that one of the major issues has been trying to get ironically, provincial approval for a dock. And why that's required in this instance is because it is a multi-berth, significantly large dock that exceeds provincial allowance, right? So they do need provincial approval. That's taking a long time, and that's been the delay. That CD11 zone has a 24-meter height allowance, which wasn't carried forward into the draft. It has reduced setbacks and reduced parking vehicle requirements. And as council may recall, this is what you considered about 2 or 3 years ago when the rezoning was done. There was also an amendment done in 2022, which we weren't aware, we missed, in relation to the foreshore bylaw to allow that oversized dock structure for 60 berths to occur, none of which was included in bylaw 1395 as a draft. So what we're proposing, and this is in discussion with the property owner who highlighted the issues, a couple of site-specific amendments, one to deal with the 24-meter height allowance. We're going to be a little bit more specific in that because we're not proposing to carry forward the site plan that currently exists in the CD11 zone. We see a lot of issues with that because once you put a site plan for a specific development into your zoning bylaw, it really limits their ability to make any modification to it when it actually comes time to build. So it can be limiting in that way. Although arguably for the purpose of the CD11 zone, that site-specific map did help in relation to the reduced setbacks because we could tie it to specific buildings. So that does present a challenge. So while we are proposing the 25-meter height allowance be put back, because there is no site plan, we're not recommending that the reduced setbacks be applied through the zoning bylaw. What we're recommending to council is that, recognizing that they have development permits that expired and have to come back for approval, we feel that the variance issue should be dealt with through a development variance permit and not through the zoning. And then with regards to the dock, recognizing that the W1 zone is now in the main zoning bylaw, reestablishing that site-specific provision that gave them the 60-berth marina approval. So correcting some oversights with the drafting, but that's essentially 8,000 Cottonwood in a nutshell. Okay, 32 Empire. So again, this is another CD transition zone issue. So the CD10 zone, and again, as council may recall, the whole concept, as I understand it, was to provide a live-work opportunity for people, small-scale industrial, light industrial opportunities. And so the CD10 zone is a mix of industrial uses, but it also allows for the stratification of the building and for dwelling units individually to be part of each strata unit. What we've seen at a staff level through business license applications is that some of the businesses attempting to establish themselves in the building aren't industrial in nature. And also that there's, from my understanding from the building inspector, there's issues with the fire resistance rating that was built into the building, and that impacts the ability of some industrial uses to occur there because the fire rating just isn't there to provide adequate separation from the dwelling units upstairs. So it limits this industrial use, and then also meeting with the property owner and recognizing some of the business license applications that have come forward, that maybe the transitioning it to the general industrial zone was not maybe the best option, and that the service commercial 2 zone with some site-specific allowances would be a more appropriate use of that building and would allow for more of that home business balanced lifestyle option that they're trying to create there to occur. So recognizing, and I fully concede that this property is within the town's industrial area, yet we're asking you to consider a service commercial zoning for it, but recognizing that it is a different type of building, which again, I think was what prompted the CD zone to begin with, than what you find elsewhere in your industrial zone, that maybe a different type of zoning is warranted in this instance. So the draft of the zoning bylaw before you today is proposing a CS2 zone on 32 Empire.
Question.
Mhm.
How does that impact the apartments up top?
They would still be able to be used as residential units for each of the, I guess, what do they call them, the strata bays underneath?
But right now, they're supposed to, whoever's downstairs is supposed to rent upstairs,
That's the idea.
and I hear they're not doing that.
That could be.
Could be.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, the whole concept is that the person living upstairs would be working downstairs, but it's difficult to enforce that and to compel it. And if that's not the case, if somebody is using the industrial bay downstairs and not living upstairs, then it would seem to be a waste of a dwelling unit too. I mean, there's two sides of looking at it, but. Yeah, yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, the opportunity is still there for somebody who wants to purchase it and live and work in the same unit, so. Keep going. Sure. Okay, so 8,000 Vedette. So this is something we became aware of again when we were just going through the bylaw again. So we understand that in 2019, it was before council as a rezoning application. Council fully supported it at that time. And then when council considered it, it was quite clearly stated it was going to be 54 units with 28 secondary units in the form of basement suites. Unfortunately, an oversight in the drafting when the R7 zone was put on the property, there was no allowance made for suites. And so when we were transitioning it over, it was proposed to put it into the RM1 zone. And so that RM1 zone, arguably, it's not rendering anything legally non-conforming because the current zoning already did that. We don't think that's appropriate because that was never part of the concept that was presented to council, and we just presumed that when council supported it, it supported all aspects of it, including the 28 units. So we're proposing to correct this, by applying a site-specific amendment to reintroduce that 28 unit allowance for the suites, and then everything becomes conforming and consistent with zoning. Which again, when, from a staff level, when we start getting comfort letter requests or realtors or people asking like, is this allowed? Is this allowed? And we have to look at the zoning and say, no, it's not currently allowed, but that we think that's a drafting error, that this would correct that, so. Okay, I'm gonna switch over to the OCP amendments now, and a lot of this again, and I apologize, when we were doing the map analysis for the OCP amendments earlier this year, we were looking at it in the context of the zoning bylaw, and at that point, I'm not sure we had a definitive transition for the CD zones. So as a result, a lot of the CD zone properties ended up not being in development permits areas, even though they previously had been before we did the amendment in March or April or whatever it was. So we're coming back to council now to correct that. It's subject to your approval, of course, but I put some examples up here where you can see some properties currently are not in a development permit area designation, even though a lot of the properties around them or similarly zoned parcels are in development permit areas. And it's a matter of consistency. We think it important that this be rectified. So we're proposing, we're just proposing that the DP area be put onto these particular parcels, and they're all within the schedules to the OCP amendment. The other one we're dealing with, and again, it's a CD zone transition issue. This was a challenging one because, of course, the original CD2 zone contemplated a mixed use development. And it's actually the two parcels. So you can see the yellow highlighted one here is the one that we're dealing with currently, but the other part of the CD2 zone is the one immediately to the south of it. And you can see it's been developed exclusively to residential. The commercial component was never completed, and it was actually supposed to occur in this particular parcel. So in terms of transition, does it transition to a commercial use or does it transition to a residential use? And a complicating factor for us was, of course, that the property is currently under application for rezoning, and the applicant is asking for residential use. So some back and forth on this one. What we're coming back to council for is we're proposing that the transition from the CD zone be to a multifamily residential zone, the RM1 zone, and to facilitate that, that the OCP designation change to RM, that a multifamily DP area be put on it, but that, recognizing if council supports this approach now, it negates the need for the rezoning application. So yeah, it's tough because we're asking you to make a decision that you're also being asked to make in the context of a rezoning application. So there is a bit of a chicken and egg prejudging the merits of an application here, but we have to transition out of this CD2 zone, and the applicant is asking for an RM1 zone, and we feel it has merit from a planning perspective. So we're recommending in favor of this.
Okay. We all okay with that? RM, so, okay.
The one caveat I wanted to make council
Yeah.
aware of, though, is that even if the zoning change occurs, and again, this is an administrative issue, but we are preparing a potential exclusion package for council's consideration in the fall, most likely. it's this land and actually the parcel to the south, as well as some other parcels in town, are still within the agricultural land
Mhm.
reserve, which presents a problem because if you're familiar with the ALR, as a local government, if you adopt a zone that purports to allow non-farm uses to occur, that zone is invalid. And that's exactly what we're asking council to do here. So we recognize that there's a lot of merit from the land use perspective to seeing this develop to multifamily residential. But the ALR layer is a complicating factor because that RM1 zone is invalid until we get it out of the reserve. And so what that means for the property owners, they can't submit a building application for multifamily, which is why we're preparing this exclusion package for your consideration, hopefully in the fall, so that we can get the ball rolling on getting this excluded. And I'm
So
not sure.
it hasn't been used for ALR purposes for a long time. Well, not as long as I can remember.
Yeah, I can just speak to it briefly. So I've reviewed a number of these files, the kind of like the oddities that we've seen right around the town where you have a number of these residential lots that are remaining in the ALR but have clearly been built out for residential purposes. And going through some of the file materials, it just seems to me that the comments that have been received from the commission in the past in response to previous OCP reviews has been that they've endorsed non-farm uses on a lot of these parcels, but they've never formally been removed via an exclusion application. So hopefully I'll be bringing something forward within the next month or two to kind of clean up those oddities, right? And try to get that administrative kind of barrier out contingent on the ALC's approval.
So has an application been put into the ALC to have this removed?
No,
Or
so
no?
that would have to come before council.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, with the changes to the land commission about 4 or 5 years ago, you as a council would have to initiate any exclusion application. And generally, the commission is looking to make sure that it's consistent with your approach to growth management, your OCP, et cetera. And so we feel there's a strong case, obviously, in this instance, that yes, I mean, allowing this to be developed to medium density residential is wholly consistent with the town's designation as a primary growth area. It's consistent with the OCP direction in terms of growth management. And also just, yeah, as Shannon indicated, previous, not decisions, but indications from the commission in relation to development of these parcels. They've already indicated a prefer, like an openness to it being developed this way. So I think there's a strong argument for exclusions. Okay, so some miscellaneous items, which I apologize for. These are just some typo issues that we've caught again as we've continued to work through the bylaw in anticipation of today's meeting. So I'll start with this one, although it's not really in the same, I guess, category typo as some of the subsequent slides, which we'll see in a minute. But when we presented previously on 4300, and again, just for council's benefit, and I'll go back to the aerial here. So now we're dealing with the parcel immediately to the south of the one highlighted in yellow. So the same issues apply in relation to the ALR, but the OCP designation that we proposed to you back when we did the OCP amendments earlier this year had it down as a medium density RM1 zone. In discussions with the property owners, they've indicated that you know, that CD2 zoning was always a mixed use development. Their particular apartment building has always been used for short-term accommodation. And so they feel that the RM1 zone is not reflective of the historical established use of that parcel. And I think they've submitted a PowerPoint presentation as part of your representation materials, which you may have seen, where they've articulated all the history of this site and how it's been used for short-term accommodation the whole way through. And so they've asked for CT4 zone. And so we're proposing that that change be made to the draft zoning map, recognizing that this would allow for vacation rentals on this particular property, which they feel has always been occurring over the decades since, like, I think 2005 or 2006 when this development proceeded. So
we do have the presentation included here, and it was 2007. One of the things, and I know they've been using it that way for quite a while. One of the things that the original MRDT proposal was that they approach Lakeshore Villas Management to use the development as part of a hospitality hotel room count to ensure. And I think that, am I not correct that if they did have a kind of a hotel at least somebody there to take reservations or give out keys or something like that, it would change what they wanted to do or the concerns for this, would it or not?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, in our meetings with them, we conveyed to them, like, part of why we recommended originally that this be considered a medium density residential development and not a tourist accommodation one is that I believe the property's been assessed as residential. There's no history of business licensing. I don't know what the exact arrangements are in terms of like a group strata arrangement for tourist accommodation allowances, but I mean, one only has to go online to see that it
Yes.
appears that they're being rented individually.
Yes, they are.
But going forward, I think they're also aware of the changes that are resulting from the Short-Term Tourist Accommodation Act. And that I think there's exemptions in relation to how certain strata hotels, if you can call them, I'm not sure the precise wording, but that there's exemptions for those. And I think they're looking at that and trying to make a case that they fit that exemption. So this is part of that, right? Having the zoning in place to reflect how they've been operating and also where they're going moving forward.
Okay, so you're suggesting that it be changed to, and I've got it, I had it back here, but I'll have to go. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's,
Well, so that's a change from what you saw in June. The June version of the bylaw had them as RM1, but in subsequent discussions with them and also in the representations that you've got in your package there, they're arguing that that was an incorrect understanding of their particular parcel. It's got a different history and a different type of use, and that the CT4 zone is a better reflection of that.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. So, thank you. And, Mr. Gersh, just to clarify on that, obviously, this is given to them with no indication or with no, say promise, but assurance that, they would qualify still under the current legislation, obviously because of the opt-in for the, primary residency requirement. I know council has all met with, this property representatives a few times. Previously, I think there's some history on the property in which the management of, let's say, call it the front counter was either done offsite or done in an external building. I'm not sure what that qualification would be for in that CT4 zoning though to require such if that was the case. We do know there's one, I think might be that CT, I don't think it's that CT1, but one around the corner there, which I'm not sure what the new zoning would be. Which there is at least a front counter available for them. Although some of them still do operate STRs separate from that against the current legislation, but
Yeah, and I'm going to concede that we have just not had time to get into the weeds of the whole vacation rental discussion because it has been put off, and we do have urban systems helping us or assisting us with that particular component of the review. And I mean, we've as representations, because I mean, it wasn't just these property owners who flagged concerns about vacation rentals as part of the process, but everyone that has come in as part of the zoning bylaw review, we've been reminding the person submitting the representation that there is a separate project going on, but also making urban systems aware of the various issues that have come forward. Because I think a lot of the discussion with council previously on vacation rentals, I think was focused almost exclusively on the residential, low density residential zones and not some of the other zones that we're seeing some of the questions or concerns come in from, right? So we're hopeful, like, yes, this is one step for this particular property in relation to formalizing. I think it's happened historically, but I mean, there still could be other changes coming out of the vacation rental review. And of course, any property owner in town still has to contend with the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act, as well as council's request to opt into the principal residence requirement, right? So. Okay. Okay, so here are some of the minor typos, which again, I apologize for. So unfortunately, I missed one on the small scale multi-unit or mullet unit residential. So we need to correct that prior to or at first reading. And then the second one is a reference to the OCP amendment. That's a screenshot from Schedule D. With an OCP amendment or any amendment bylaw, there's usually two components, the text part and the map part. So the text part accurately describes 8,000 Cottonwood and says it's going into the multifamily residential development permit area. Unfortunately, I didn't correct Schedule D and the map reference to reflect the multifamily residential development permit area. It still references the mixed use commercial development permit area. So I just need to make a minor typo change there to correct that. And I think Yeah, so with that's the end of my overview, and I fully concede that, I mean, I haven't attempted to address every single comment that came in the representations. These were just the ones that, if you will, kind of filtered to the top for staff, in terms of what we think needed to be changed. I know there was the one representation from Mr. Pendergraph where I think we have corrected some of the other typos that he picked up on. You know, if you attended the public information meeting, he highlighted the whole issue with panhandles. So we've corrected that reference, and I think a few other ones as well. But I don't have any more slides on representation. So I was just going to say, like, if there's anything that you saw in there that caught your attention that may need correcting, I mean, we're certainly open to taking direction on it.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess on our attachment on page 112 or 113.
Mhm.
Well, I guess I happen to live there and it just says mobile homes, but shouldn't manufactured homes be included there? We're the only zone in the town that it got passed, I guess, when I moved in there in 207, 208. And your definition of mobile home is kind of correct, but shouldn't it also include manufactured homes?
I'm just going to jump to a different part of the bylaw, but I suspect that single detached dwelling, the definition of it would include reference to a modular home, but not a mobile. So single detached being already permitted allows for those two types, but it doesn't allow for the Z240, which is the mobile, hence the need for the site-specific amendment.
But I guess, I believe there was mobile homes before this zoning got changed.
Yeah, so this formalizes, it recognizes that particular property has been developed to mobiles in the past, but that the new zone doesn't allow for mobiles, right? Because you have your other mobile home park zone, which generally covers that off. So this will allow for mobiles to continue to be used at that site, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
And I guess there was one other reference here. It's kind of, I don't know what page it was on. Like the government, it allows 4 marijuana plants per home, and somewhere in there you excluded. I'd have to kind of read every page again to reference that.
I'm just wondering if it's the home occupation allowance. We're just scrolling
Yep.
through here. It'd be like section 7. What was that? That one. Home occupation. Yeah, so there are references under the home occupation use to cannabis production. But that's generally like cannabis production on a commercial scale, right? Like it's not, I don't think the bylaw is interested in people's personal growing. It's like, just don't go trying to,
No.
grow a huge amount of volume for.
I respect that, but in there it says it's not allowed,
That's right.
but it is allowed up to 4.
Well, no, but the
So-
reference that you're picking up on is a reference to commercial production, not personal use, right? So like don't undertake a, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one thing that I was thinking about this the other day, and with my insurance background, basically one of the concerns I had might not be a concern, is if we rezone somebody's place and they have replacement costs on their house, and their house is to be at replacement cost, has to be rebuilt the same location on that same lot.
Mhm.
If they go to move it, they get depreciated amount. And they can't do that. They gotta build on the same lot. So if we rezone that and now they can't build there, are we liable for,
No, council wouldn't be liable. And again, depending on how much demolition happens, again, like if the zoning bylaw has changed in a way, which hopefully it hasn't, because I mean, we're trying to get more flexibility in terms of building envelope. But if it has changed in a way that they're precluded by zoning regs from rebuilding exactly where it was, that would only apply, I think, if more than 75% of the structure or the value of the structure is removed as determined by the building inspector. Otherwise, non-conforming siting applies and they can rebuild. But as you say, I mean, they would have to rebuild the house exactly as it was, right? Which is unusual. Usually when something gets destroyed or demolished and people have to rebuild, they want to update it and maybe it's a slightly different design, right? It's not common that they rebuild exactly as it was, but
Okay, thank you.
I'll ask one more question, just your opinion. If this gets passed to allow 2 or 3 homes on one lot, does that mean everybody's taxes will go up? Even though they don't build, say they keep one house, but they could actually build 2? Just your opinion?
Well, again, I'm hesitant to comment on other agencies because of course this would be determined by BC Assessment. But my basic understanding is that BC Assessment will generally look at what's occurring on the site. And so even if we make these changes to the zoning, if you still have a single detached house, that's what they're going to assess you on. The only time that's different is if it's a vacant lot. And if it's a vacant parcel, then they'll look at, well, what's the highest possible best use? And that will determine your assessment, right? So.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think. Okay, so we're looking at next steps. If we don't have any more questions. And Mrs. Robinson, can we have this whole thing moved? We don't have to have separate motions? Can all be done?
Yes, your worship, it can all be one motion.
Okay,
As we may have to add as amended, because there's been a few changes to it. So the first line, the one that talks about first and second reading of the zoning bylaw, yep, at that point, we're gonna put as amended. So that they can make the changes that you have discussed.
okay. And the rest of them are the same?
Yes.
So I can read this out then and we will vote on it now. What will happen is that when there's first and second reading, if that's okay today, that just allows us to go on and look at having, public hearings and doing all that kind of stuff to allow us to move further, right? It's not meaning that we're adopting this today.
That's
No.
right.
Okay, so I will read this then. I'm just wondering for people that don't have this in front of them, perhaps I should read it. So moved by Councillor King, we haven't got a seconder yet, that the official community plan amendment bylaw 1375.06 2024 and zoning bylaw 1395 2024 be read a first and second time as amended. And that council considers the process as outlined in the administrative report dated May the 14th, 2024, and the appropriate consultation for the purpose of Section 475 of the Local Government Act. And that in accordance with Section 477 of the Local Government Act, Council has considered OCP Amendment Bylaw number 1375.06 2024 in conjunction with its financial and applicable waste management plans, and that the holding of the public hearing for OCP Amendment Bylaw number 1375.06 2024 and zoning bylaw number 1395 2024 be scheduled for September the 10th, 2024, and that staff give notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirement of the Local Government Act. So we have moved and seconded. Councillor Poderica. Anything else? All in favor? Thank you very much. And thank you to Chris and Shannon for all the work that they've done. And thank you for meeting with people and answering their questions. I'm sure they weren't all answered the way everybody wants it, but it just shows that it's a really confusing issue and we're really trying our best. So we appreciate the fact that you came down and held meetings with so many people. And thank you to everybody else. Thank you, Eileen, for sitting here and listening to us for an hour and a half. Okay, so next, do we have any new business? No, we don't. Therefore, he got in first. Terminated by Councillor Poderica, seconded Councillor King. All in favor.